Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to continue my dissection of the factions in the upcoming marathon game by dissecting certain elements of each group or asking specific questions. And the question today that I seek to expand upon is, can the UESC win a war in Tau Ceti? But before I get into the nitty-gritty of this topic, I recommend checking out my video about the marathon timeline or part 1 of my ARG series from last year, where I dive much deeper into the historical context of the UESC within the marathon series. So if you don't have that information or you're not familiar with the series, it might help to check those things out before watching this video. So to start, we kind of have to assess the true strength of the UESC. What are their actual capabilities? And to do this, we have to kind of look at what they've been able to accomplish thus far. They were able to travel a 400-year journey on a starship made out of a moon and colonize a distant planet. That represents a technological and organizational advancement and control that probably most other players within Seoul, at least, aren't capable of. Now, this gets a little bit more complicated when we know some of the specifics, such as the UESC president himself not knowing anything about the 10 Mjolnir Mark IV cyborgs that were secretly placed on board the Marathon. So, although they are an all-powerful government and clearly militarily and technologically advanced, there's also some sort of, leaks or holes within their intelligence network that allowed some sort of unknown entity, that being Mida or potentially someone else, to place these kind of weapons of mass destruction on board the Marathon entirely without their knowledge. And potentially some people within the organization themselves, cough, cough, Bernard Strauss, might be working or conspiring with these other entities to do these things. Another caveat to the power and strength that they possess is when we look at the development of the Marathon itself, specifically their relationship with the company Traxus. Traxus, we know, is capable of developing spacefaring vessels and seems to have worked very closely with the UESC over the development of the Marathon. Now, we can assume that this relationship was contractual, that the UESC provided monetary resources to Traxus, and in return, they provided the labor, resources, and technology that was utilized at least partially to create the Marathon ship themselves. And obviously, Traxus being based out of Mars, having moved their headquarters there, were probably the right men for the job and able to accomplish quite a bit. Now, the extent on which the UESC leaned on Traxus to actually develop and engineer and create the vessel itself, we don't really know, but we can assume that they probably had a very large impact on the mission as a whole, on the basis that Traxus now feels like they have some sort of say over the Lost Colony and the Marathon vessel itself based on the work that they did. So at least in Traxus's eyes, they contributed to the project pretty heavily. So these two combined pieces of knowledge about Mida's potential involvement with UESC operations and Traxus's involvement seem to indicate that while the UESC as its own thing is very strong and controlling and powerful, it is possibly spread so thin that there are holes in their defenses that allow them to be controlled or have things done against them that maybe in different circumstances they would be able to prevent or control, but they just don't have the resources to truly have authority over everything that they command authority over. But all of this is based on our understanding of the UESC in the 2400s, and the new game takes place in the 2800s, the late 2800s. So we're looking at 400 years difference in time, and surely the organization itself has changed and evolved just like their enemies have as well. And how do they really stack up to Mida and Traxus of the 2800s? Well, there's two additional pieces of information that we can kind of look at to gather an understanding of that situation as well. Now, during the ARG, we saw Mida release a zine, or a manifesto of sorts, detailing their feelings towards the UESC and the megacorporations who are racing to reach the Lost Colony. Obviously, Mida opposes their authority and control, but they also seemingly reveal some behind-the-scenes knowledge about the tension that exists between the UESC and Traxus. Page 34 of the zine reveals that Mida suspects the secretive S-series biomata, which Sakaguchi appears to be hiding from the UESC by falsifying Traxus purchase orders, is going to be used by Traxus in Tau Ceti. The fact that Mida was able to gather this intel, whether the UESC knew this or not, represents at the very least a continuation of the failure of their intelligence operations to contain such sensitive information, possibly displaying their continued lack of control over their intel network since the 2400s. Now, the secondary component of this is that although the information is released, the UESC is able to have it removed by taking down the information that might have published and covering their protest art piece, which does display a level of control that I'm not entirely sure any of the other factions would have been able to pull off. The next thing that hints at the strength of the UESC is their evidence files from 2893, and this is seemingly the year that the events of the game and trailer take place in. These evidence files show that the UESC has confirmed documentation of a SFIT. It's not exactly clear if this is known to anyone else, but clearly their ability to obtain data from Tau Ceti is massive and represents operational capabilities that feel almost exclusive to a governmental military. That isn't to say that a privatized military funded by Traxus couldn't have that level of sophistication, but if the Traxus chat room logs are anything to go off of, then it appears that they are mostly engaging with freelance-style mercenaries, like White Rabbit, as opposed to organizing their own standing force, which might indicate a lack of control over the units that they employ. All of this sets up the UESC as a force to be reckoned with, even if there are some apparent flaws to the system and structure that they have. I mean, if that wasn't the case, Traxus wouldn't be organizing so aggressively to engage in combat against the UESC in a different solar system. So, will it be enough to truly deal with all of the entities that are going to have interest within Tau Ceti? Well, let's look at them. Mida is capable of conducting pretty advanced intelligence operations and were a known and feared terrorist organization in Seoul. Clearly, they've been able to, in some way, integrate themselves inside of the UESC and possibly the other factions that are vying for control. So they're obviously somebody who's going to have a level of impact on the UESC's operations, but to what extent and is there any room for an alliance is to be seen. Sakaguchi is someone who's kind of standing slightly against the UESC, but probably primarily for profit, as hiding their information, such as their dealings with Traxus, seems to be an act just to preserve the relationship for both sides, because as a company, they're probably reliant on the profit that is generated from the contracts that they have providing biomata to the UESC, as well as the contracts that they have providing biomata to Traxus, which clearly has a large amount of capital and has a vast amount of control within Seoul. And Traxus obviously appears to be the greatest threat to the UESC as they have the most wealth, the access to the S-series biomata, and probably many more resources that could prove to be problematic for the UESC's operations. And on top of all that, we know that in the Traxus chat room with the board of directors, we see them kind of openly discussing their plans to actively fight against what the UESC wishes to be done in Tau Ceti, and that they feel like they have a certain claim or stake in the Lost Colony. New Cascadia is what it's referred to in the ARG, and they seek to impose their control over that territory. And so they're going to be kind of like the largest direct threat that the UESC has to face. And obviously, their hundreds of years of accruing wealth within Seoul will give them a huge upper hand in terms of the threat that they represent, as opposed to the other forces that we talked about. There are also two other groups that we have seen mentioned, although we don't really have any details or historical context for how truly significant they're going to be. I'll start with describing to you Cyber Acme. Cyber Acme is a word that we see printed on the terminals from the original Marathon games, and all over the ARG as well. They even sold a Cyber Acme t-shirt to kind of indicate that perhaps their involvement is going to be a little more than what we thought, given that they weren't a huge contributor or element within the ARG, the trailer, or any of the promotional materials that we've gotten thus far. It appears that Cyber Acme is some sort of software technology company. Perhaps they run the, operating systems that are on board the Marathon or that the UESC utilizes. So obviously, from a technical standpoint, the people who make the software that you're reliant upon could end up being very influential in terms of how you go about your operations in a technologically advanced world far into the future. The other organization or group that we potentially have seen so far is New Caloric, which appeared in the concept art that we got from the dev update in October on, I believe it was like the fabric that was hanging down behind the or next to the thief character. New Caloric could be some sort of entity that has some sort of financial investment in Marathon. A New Caloric, of course, obviously brings to mind food, calories. Perhaps it's some form of new calorie or energy that humans consume, or perhaps biomatas need to consume it. I don't really know. Maybe it's some sort of advanced farming technique designed for a different planet. But they could represent some sort of additional faction that may have some interest over what occurs in Tau Ceti. And who knows whether these two entities are going to have any interest in engaging in the Cold War kind of battle or dispute between Traxus, Mida, the UESC, and possibly even Sakaguchi. But they are two entities we should keep in mind when we're thinking about whether or not the UESC is able to truly garner control over this distant colony. The last thing that I want to kind of touch on in terms of understanding what level of success the UESC can have would be the actual resources that they are going to have within Tau Ceti that we're 100% aware of. So let's start with the Marathon itself. The Marathon vessel is obviously a huge resource that, if the UESC controls, would be hugely beneficial. Now, we know that the initial crew of the Marathon was around 25,000 people, and we can assume that with the colony having existed on Tau Ceti for about 10 years prior to the 4 showing up, and the fact that it was on this 400-year, 300-year journey through space, we can assume that those numbers probably ballooned up, and it's a colony ship, so surely that society, colony, or culture of Bobs probably grew a little bit larger. Maybe a conservative estimate would be that 35,000 people or 40,000 people may have been on board or, existed within Tau Ceti at the time that the 4 showed up. Now, obviously, it seems like all of those people are no longer there, either killed by the 4, captured by Durandal and taken to Lo-Wan, or something else. But we really don't know what happened to the people who were planetside. We have no understanding as to whether or not they foresaw a additional attack coming from the 4 after the security officer was able to kind of repel the attack on the Marathon and the Mjolnir Mark IV cyborgs were able to save the colony planetside. We don't know if the humans thought about what if more show up. Did potential groups of humans recede farther into Tau Ceti itself and lay stake to kind of secretive rebellion camps, or did they have some sort of underground infrastructure, living like mole people in case the 4 showed back up? We just really don't know. So there could be some Bobs or people loyal to the UESC still on the Marathon or at Tau Ceti itself that are entirely unaccounted for, that potentially the UESC could fall on for assistance if they're engaging in operations on Tau Ceti to repel whatever is there, whether that's 4 or new human threats. Those could be additional individuals who seek to help them in whatever their goal is. Another interesting thing to point out is that in Marathon 1, Terminal 2 on the level of the Rose talks specifically about the Marathon itself being a very defensible position and a stable weapons platform. So if the UESC has any upper hand in recovering the Marathon because it is their vessel, whether that's some sort of encrypted security clearance that allows them to activate comms arrays or weapons platforms that may have survived the Fours attack, then that would obviously give them a huge upper hand. If the Marathon itself truly is this kind of husk of a ship sitting there completely empty, if the UESC is able to get to it first and turn that into its base of operations, we could see them being able to kind of do a huge amount of damage to whatever vessels or ships are incoming from Traxus or Mida or other organizations that are flying into the star system from that kind of orbiting, Marathon ship that is able to be this stable weapons platform, and specifically destroy maybe other spacefaring vessels. That would be like a huge upper hand for the UESC to have. And the second kind of guaranteed resources that we know the UESC is going to have access to is going to be the Equanimity, the Canefisher class vessel of Project Goliath that is being sent to reclaim the lost colony. And there's a few specific things that we got from the ship's manifest, which was a part of the ARG, that obviously give us a pretty clear picture of what its capabilities are. In the notes section of that manifest, we see that they have these stanchions, generators, and deck cranes that obviously seem to be gearing it up for that reclamation of the Marathon. If that's equipment that only the UESC thought to bring or had the kind of top secret engineering documents of the Marathon to know what would be necessary to regain control of the vessel given whatever happened to it, potentially they could be the only ones there who have the resources necessary even to turn the Marathon back into that stable platform. And then the other kind of huge revelation that we get from this manifest is the 150-person crew that obviously includes these signal intelligence operatives, human intelligence operatives, field engineers, and special operators who are going to be conducting these, planet-side war missions against whatever interests exists there. So we do know that they seem pretty geared up to not only reclaim the Marathon, but conduct pretty advanced reconnaissance and combat missions on this planet, utilizing, like I said, presumably the biomata. So in totality, I believe that these are the relevant elements that exist when asking the question, can the UESC win in Tau Ceti? But before I give you the conclusion that I've come to, I would like to share with you some community thoughts. I asked if anyone has some speculation on the UESC's role in the upcoming game in the community Discord, and I got some great responses. So I want to feature a few of these and share my thoughts on them. And if you would like to be involved with discussing Marathon lore, please consider joining the Discord. A link will be included down below because I love hearing everyone's thoughts and speculating alongside all of you guys who watch and listen to the videos. So first we have Seb, who says, it's funny because in my opinion, they are the least interesting faction, the UESC, but their influence is so massive and imposing. Just goes to show how amazing the world building is for each group involved. And obviously I don't know what angle/perspective Bungie will adopt, but I find it ironic that they could be making a game that criticizes/parodies major conglomerates that have power over everything, yet they are owned by Sony, LOL. Thank you for the comment, Seb, and yes, I agree. They are the kind of boring faction, it seems. It's kind of standard military and all, but the interwoven nature of their members with Mida and their intimate dealings with Traxus and Sakaguchi could hint at a more intriguing group of individuals hidden behind the veil of this large government obscurity. And yes, the megacorps are making fun of the megacorps, it seems, when it comes to Sony paying for the Mida, which is very true and also hilarious. Thanks again, Seb. Next, I would like to spotlight Tolzer, who provides this pretty cool little outline of how he foresees the UESC interacting with the other factions in the new game. He says, potential roles in the new Marathon game. It's an antagonistic force. Given their history of questionable actions and desire to control the Marathon, the UESC could be a primary antagonist. They may be trying to cover up events, exploit resources, or suppress information. Source of missions/objectives. The UESC could provide missions or objectives to the player, perhaps tasking them with retrieving data, investigating incidents, or combating threats. However, their motives may not always be clear, leading to moral dilemmas. Background world building. Even if not directly involved in the main plot, the UESC's presence could enrich the game's world. Their influence might be felt through environmental details, lore entries, or interactions with other factions. Exploration of the internal conflict. The game could delve deeper into the internal conflicts within the UESC, showcasing different factions with varying agendas. This could add complexity to the narrative and offer multiple perspectives. The UESC is a key part of the Marathon universe, and it's highly probable they'll have a significant role in the new game. Whether they're allies, enemies, or a more nuanced mix of both remains to be seen. Their presence adds layers of political intrigue and potential conflict, which could be central to the game's story. Now, I really liked this breakdown. I thought it was great. And it also made me consider something that I don't know that I've fully conceptualized yet, or at least put to words here on the channel. That being that the UESC, in the ARG at least, seems to be the least involved in terms of like the actions behind the scenes. But this feeling is really tied to how the majority of the documents that we get from the ARG are almost 100 years old when it comes to the UESC. And during the events of the ARG, they're kind of just operating, or we're seeing their operations, from the perspective of Mida, who's having their site taken down or their art covered, or from the perspective of Sakaguchi, where we hear them talking about how the UESC is sending lawyers to ask them about specific purchase orders or their dealings with Traxus, as opposed to the other factions we're kind of seeing within real time. In that context, the sophistication of their intelligence network seems like it could be way more advanced than what Traxus and Mida are working with currently. Also, the UESC is definitely intertwined with Mida in some deep way, I suspect, and I agree with that kind of guess there. Also, I like the idea of the UESC being this kind of looming presence over the world, working in mysterious ways. Thank you so much for the response, Tolzer. I appreciate it. Lastly, I would like to feature Yap Yap of Rats, who is a true hero. He's been around for a while on the streams and in the Discord, and even got the Marathon 30th anniversary legend role on the Discord for his Marathon trivia winning performance in the Kahoot that we played during the 30th anniversary stream. Yap Yap says, I see the UESC functioning as both an antagonist to Mida as well as a major customer to Sakaguchi and Traxus. Despite the fact that they clearly want to be the de facto in charge group, I see them ending up acting more along the lines of the PCA and Armored Core 6. Actually, I could see the factions acting very similar to the faction in Armored Core 6. UESC is primed to be the PCA, Mida is RLF, then the corporate rivalry between Traxus and Sakaguchi is in the same vein as the conflict between the Balam Industries and Arquebus Corporation. And man, do I love this comment. This is so cool and a great parallel to draw. If you haven't played Armored Core 6, I totally recommend it. Obviously, From Software is a group that I'm very much infatuated with. I love the Souls-likes, and Armored Core 6 was actually my first Armored Core game. And it has kind of made me want to go back, but I know that the other ones are very different. But we do see something similar in terms of a bunch of corporate and government interests playing out on this mysterious, distant planet that has human settlements and colonies on it as well, and kind of the tensions that arise between these groups as they all seek the power that is to be gained from controlling this world. And man, does it have one of the coolest... well, I don't want to spoil it too much. It has one of the coolest alien entities like representing gaming. And if you haven't seen the secret level episode about Armored Core, I recommend checking it out. I mean, anything that Keanu Reeves touches turns to gold. And yeah, I would totally love to see that kind of relationship and tension and the way it builds in Armored Core 6, elements of that pulled over to Marathon, because that game rocked. Thank you so much, Yap Yap, for leaving that comment. And thank you to everybody on the Discord who loves chatting about lore and the upcoming Marathon game. Obviously, I appreciate it. And like I said, if you're interested in engaging in some of those conversations and hanging out with a bunch of cool people, please consider joining. So, in conclusion, can the UESC win in Tau Ceti? Well, it seems unlikely to me that the resources that they have on board the Equanimity would be enough to deal with whatever situation is going on at the Lost Colony, plus whatever Mida, Traxus, and the other interested parties may have up their sleeves, except for their inclusion of the, quote, nuke and pave option as referenced in Draft B of the Project Goliath memoranda. Unsurprisingly, that exact language would be removed from the final draft, but the option to, quote, destroy all surface assets remains. The UESC must have quite a bit of faith in the biomata and seem to have taken a contemporary military approach where the primary focus is on kinetic combat through small groups of highly specialized operators. Perhaps the scale of conflict on Tau Ceti will be smaller than an all-out war, as that does align with the Cold War-style energy coming from the ARG. But does this mean that canonically the millions of players who experience the game are each experiencing moments that are accurate to the narrative, or does the narrative itself account for the millions of players through the influx of biomata explanation? Destiny 2 obviously sees each individual Guardian as having their own personal experience throughout the narrative, as opposed to canonically kind of including the entire player base in the main narrative, so that it wouldn't be like a huge stretch to see them do that same thing in Marathon. No matter what, the UESC is going to have a tough fight ahead since they are seemingly unaware of the Mark IV cyborgs, Traxus's true actions, and how involved Mida is even within their own organization. But perhaps a key insight would be that in the ARG we discover that the UESC is the only faction who gathered direct video evidence of that unknown presence, the Sphit we see in the trailer. Maybe their knowledge of the alien presence and potentially their knowledge of some ancient alien involvement, cough cough, the Yarrow, will give the upper hand despite being technologically reliant on Traxus and Sekaguchi technology. Surely their only true path to victory involves eliminating Traxus, but what could that really look like? I think that they could win, but at what cost? Probably losing everything that they've worked so hard to achieve. Let me know how you think the UESC will fare in Tau Ceti in the comments, and thanks for watching. Bye.